You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm Andy Tanner, your host. This is where investing is made simple. And we have a very interesting guest for this particular episode. We're going to be talking about the 7 deadly economic sins from the book, 7 Deadly Economic Sins, Obstacles to Prosperity and Happiness Every Citizen Should Know. And this is written by Dr. James Otteson. So, Dr. Otteson, thank you for being on the program and being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
This is going to be an exciting thing. We've spent a lot of time really in the series. We've done a series on macroeconomics, inflation. It's quite a time with so much, especially in my home country, the United States, so much fiscal stimulus, so much accommodative policy by the Federal Reserve. Seems like an interesting time. So this is a great time for people to study and read your book. Before we get into the book, 7 Deadly Economic Sins, give us just a little bit of your background and what brought you to this point where you thought, you know what, this book is needed and I'm the guy to write it.
Well, thank you for asking me all of that, and you're right; these are interesting times, aren't they?
Oh boy!
So my background is I'm a philosopher by training. My PhD is in philosophy, but I teach in a business school, which is a pretty unusual place for a philosopher. But I did my graduate work and have written quite a bit about Adam Smith, both his moral theory and what's much better known now, his economic theory. And what that got me interested in was understanding really what are the institutional requirements for growing prosperity, and also whether there is a way of engaging in the kind of commercial society that Adam Smith and many others have recommended, while at the same time being a fully moral person. And what led me in particular to write this book was the growing concern that I had that many people who have opinions about economic matters, and frankly, that's almost all of us, we all have opinions about economics and economic policy, and some of those opinions are very strongly held, but most of us have not actually studied economics. We didn't major in economics as college students. We haven't really studied, we don't read what economists write. And to some extent, that's perfectly understandable because, economists disagree about a lot of things.
Sure.
They vote for different parties and they can't tell you when the next recession is going to happen exactly. They can't tell you what the market's going to be doing. So to some extent, we can be forgiven, I think, for not really paying a lot of attention to what economists write. On the other hand, and this is really what led me to write this book, there are some things that virtually all economists agree on, some basic principles that inform their discipline that wherever they are on the political or economic spectrum, they tend to agree with. And some of those basic principles are, I think, some of the most important ones that can enable us to make good decisions not only in our own personal lives, but also when we're evaluating policy or policy proposals. And so I selected 7 of the most important, what I think are the most important of these economic principles, and especially ones that people tend to disagree with, sort of, in the wider culture. These are things that seem maybe counterintuitive or that people, for whatever reason, for various reasons, are unsure of. But these are things that I think economists can, and economics as a discipline, can help us to actually make better decisions for ourselves and for regarding policy.
Well, first of all, I think it's wonderful to have a philosopher in a business school. I wouldn't be able to get a degree in either. I don't think. But Adam Smith, for most people know if they're into economics or investing at all. His book, The Wealth of Nations, very, very well known. I tried to read it once and I was out. It was kind of like reading one of my own books. It's lights out. It was a great sleep aid. And the term invisible hand actually isn't in the book, for my knowledge. And the idea that
it is, but only once. It does occur, but only once in the whole book. It's a 1,000-page long book, and that phrase occurs just once.
Well, I probably didn't get to that part where because I was looking for it, and I probably didn't get that far, but. I think the invisible hand, tell me if I'm wrong, is that, hey, if we give people the freedom to say, hey, how do I offer value to the world? And I'm going to go to work and see if I can compete. And I say, you know what? I'm going to get a better product, a better price. Someone comes out with an iPhone with a battery life of 5 hours. Well, I'm going to get one at a lower price that has 6 hours. And that idea, it creates this force, I suppose, this invisible hand that keeps things in line and raises, some people are going to do very, very well the more value they give. Others, not so well, but it seems the rising tide raises all boats. I mean, when you start with Adam Smith, what do I miss there, or what do you have to say about that?
No, I think you're exactly right. So this idea of the invisible hand for Smith, so yeah, it is sort of buried in the middle of this 1,000-page long book. So I'm not surprised that you might not have seen it. But his idea is, as you say, that with the right institutional support, meaning protections of private property, and also institutions that don't allow people to enrich themselves by stealing from other people or defrauding other people, with just those sort of basic institutional supports. What that will mean is that people will want to improve their own lives. They'll want to improve the lives of themselves and their families and their communities. They'll look for ways to use their time, their talent, their treasure to improve their lives. And what they'll be led to do is to figure out ways to improve their own situations by, at the same time, improving the situations of other people. And so that's where Smith says it would be as if they're led by an invisible hand to benefit other people, even people they don't know, even if they're doing it unintentionally, even if it's people in some cases they don't like very much. So if you think about what goes on in a commercial society or in a market-based society, if I want to have success, suppose I start a business and I want to be successful in my business because I want to make a better life for my family or my children or my community or for my employees, etc. The only way I can succeed in business is if I convince other people to part with some of their limited resources in exchange for whatever good or service that I'm making. Yeah. And what that means is that I have to think about other people. I can't only think about myself. If I'm only thinking about myself and what matters to me, well, I'm going to go out of business pretty quickly. Yeah. What I have to do is think about other people. And so what Smith suggests is that the incentive, the drive, the motivation to improve our own situations will lead us to find ways to provide value to other people. And so as all of the different individuals are doing this at the same time, what this leads to is a overall rise in prosperity, a generation, a creation of prosperity, ever more prosperity for ever more people. And that's the story, and the hopeful story, I would say, that Smith offers for a commercial society. And that's what the invisible hand mechanism refers to.
Well, I wish you luck in trying to propagate that. We live in an interesting time of words. I find myself checking myself constantly to make sure that I don't say the wrong thing. The ability to take a phrase or a misstep or even a thing that wasn't communicated with skill. My gosh, you can get that plastered on a Twitter or a YouTube or a Facebook. And it's almost like we have this ability to slap a label on someone as evil if they disagree with you. And it's a very difficult time to have discussions on these things politically. For example, and maybe you can help me articulate this so I don't get myself in trouble. I believe that there are certainly unfairnesses in the world. I think if someone from a philosophical point would say that we all start off with an equal opportunity and we all start off at the same spot and anyone can do anything, I think that's unrealistic. Some people are born with a higher IQ. Some people are born privileged and they're going to go to certain schools. So there is an inequality there. And so I think to say that everything's equal and fine would be kind of a dreamland. On the other side of things is if I play the victim of myself, I can certainly find things in my life where I had to overcome. And so if I begin to preach hard work, courtesy, honesty, value, competitiveness, coming back from failure, a willingness to risk, all that good, like the attributes of the best of what makes humans best, I might say, with those things embraced, I might be able to overcome, some of the inequalities that have been, thrown on me. And if I start talking that way, boy, it's really easy to say, well, Andy's insensitive to those that are, less fortunate than he was and all that type of stuff. So to have this conversation about capitalism, I think the smart thing for capitalists to do is to clean their own house out. Now, let me give you a scenario of that, where if I can't start like cleansing my own inner vessel as a capitalist, I'm just going to give ammunition to anti-capitalists. Let me give you an example. In 2003 or 4, we had this big crash of the market. In 2000, we had 9/11. And Alan Greenspan says, we're going to have policy that says rates are low. We're going to have accommodative policy. And, bankers use that aggressively with collateralized debt obligations. They package these things up. We had this thing called a predatory loan. And someone's going to say, hey, there's no such thing as a predatory loan. I mean, people are free to get a loan and fail and go bankrupt. Okay. But when this whole thing came down, the Fed decided to purchase some of these assets instead of letting these guys fail. Now, the invisible hand, from what I understand about it, having not made it through Adam Smith's book the whole way, the invisible hand says you can fail, right? I mean, it's going to have some pain. And, we don't like pain today. We don't like dying young. We don't like having diseases. We don't like any kind of pain. So is that capitalism? If we're going to bail out huge banks, I have an issue with that. I don't think that's capitalism. What's your thought? Philosophize with me.
Well, you raised a number of issues, and one thing that connects with, you at first asked about, the difficulty we have about speaking about different issues because people can take things out of context, or if you misspeak or take a false step, then that can be held against you. And right. I think that's one thing that we're still sort of reckoning with and trying to figure out how to deal with the age of the internet. Things with the internet now are permanent; they're forever. And so, if you made a misstep 20 years ago, that doesn't ever go away. And so that raises, that permanency really raises the stakes and can make people much more risk averse, much more unwilling to take risks. And one of the, I think, side consequences of that is that, if you think about in a market-based economy, what actually leads to increasing prosperity? If you ask yourself this, what company that exists today is still going to be creating value and being successful 50 years from now? Well, it's almost impossible to know. People could guess, but you'd just be guessing basically in the dark. But not just 50 years from now, 10 years from now, 2 years from now. And what does that mean? Well, that means if we want to have increasing prosperity, what we want to have is lots of people taking entrepreneurial risks, trying lots of things, but that means that some of them will fail. So if people are becoming more and more risk averse, more and more worried about negative consequences, they're much less willing to try these, to take wild flyers and try something new because they don't want to fail. It's the fear of failure. But failure actually is an important part of any thriving ecosystem, not just an economy, but also of the animal and plant world. You need to have lots of attempts, and with lots of attempts, you're going to have lots of failures. And that's the only way to find out what might actually work. So progress is dependent, I think, on not just success. We think about it that we tend to focus on success, but it's also requires failure. And I think what we need to have is people who are willing to take risks, and then also face failure and recover from failure. I think that's an endemic part of the human condition, that we don't really grow and mature as individuals. We don't develop good judgment unless we've faced failure, experienced the negative consequences of failure, and then adapted and changed to try something new, and eventually we hope to have success. Now, that all said, back to your point about equal opportunity and people being sort of born equal, and we're all born very different. And I would give we have different packages of natural abilities and natural inclinations and preferences, and our preferences will change over time as well. But I would give maybe a piece of sort of practical advice. All of us have faced difficulties in our lives, some more than others. Some of us have faced more than just difficulties, injustices in our lives.
Yeah.
And just as a matter of practice, I think what can be hopeful and helpful in our lives is to think, it's true that we have faced these difficulties and challenges, and we will continue, and we will have more of them in the future as well. But we still have this life is the only life we have. We still have to lead this life, and so I think there's wisdom in the idea that whatever hand life has dealt you still have to play. And don't give up. Wherever you start, whatever challenges you face, try to make the best out of those situations that you possibly can. And if you're trying to improve your own situation, even given all of those negative things that you're facing, including even injustices, if you're still trying to make the best out of your own situation that you can, then there's a good chance that by doing so, you're also going to be helping other people, maybe even people you don't know. You're going to start a business or try to start a business or work at a company. And the people who will ultimately, say, buy the products or buy the services that your company is providing, you might not know who they are, they might not know who you are, and maybe under other circumstances you might have reasons to be suspicious or wary of one another, but this can be a vehicle to provide value not only for yourself but for other people. You can improve your own life and improve the lives of others as well, and that I think is something that can give people hope, and also maybe even kind of a motivational inspiration that yes, it's true that none of our lives are going to be perfect. We are all imperfect creatures. We will all fail. We will all make mistakes. And some of the mistakes or some of the bad things that happen to us in our lives are through no fault of our own. They're because other people have treated us unjustly, or because institutions are treating us unjustly. But we still have a life to lead. And thinking about, how can I improve my situation, even given the constraints and challenges I face? That can be a way to that can give us a kind of hopeful motivation for ourselves, but also the hope of improving other people's lives as well.
Politically, I've worked very hard to embrace political neutrality, and if I had to lean like even an inch out of that, I'd probably lean libertarian, because it seems like to me that Democrats and Republicans are really, really good at telling me how I should live, and they just seem to know, they both of them want more power and want it bigger, and I wish they would stay out. And let's talk about unseen consequences, because policymakers, human beings, we kind of go about the earth as if it belongs to us. Like a bird or a turtle doesn't belong to them, doesn't belong to a plant, doesn't belong to a whale. Oh, it belongs to us. It's our earth and everything's below us. So we're going to dink around with the ecosystem and we're going to manipulate things. And so we get policies in this endless try to create, like the Wizard of Oz, levers and dials and things we can tweak to try to control this thing that we believe is ours, right? And I think it's interesting how many unseen consequences. The 401k, you have a legislature, Barbara Conable up in New York, that's got a couple constituents that he wants to throw in some legislation so they can defer some, bonus on their salaries. And they write this little thing under 1,000 words called the Section 401k in a tax code in 1978. 2 years later, in 1980, you get Ted Benna, an advisor, finds this. He says, "My gosh, we could turn this into a retirement program." Next thing you know, pensions are gone, and the 401k is there was never a think tank or a brain trust or a bunch of women and men who are smart who said, "Hey, let's figure out a better way to retire." It's just this little arcane paragraph. And Wall Street says, "Well, my gosh, look at the assets under management we get here. Automatic deductions from their paycheck before they spend it into our coffers." So I look at unseen consequences. There's hundreds of examples of this. What do you see in terms of policymaker? What are some of these 7 deadly sins they commit? And what are some of the unseen consequences that are coming out of this stuff? Just a few examples to kind of tease your book a little bit, because I think it's a cool book.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, I think one of the 7 deadly economic sins I talk about in the book is what I call the great mind fallacy. And the great mind fallacy is one where we think that there is some person or maybe some group of smart people who possess the wisdom necessary to understand human society or understand the economy in its totality and are able to predict exactly what will happen if they make this policy change or tweak that regulatory change, that they know exactly what's going to happen, and so they can plan things centrally that will lead to some kind of good result.
Well, that's Jerome Powell, right? I mean, come on, don't be dogging Chairman Powell like that. Come on,
I think
he's
many
an oracle.
of us, many people are susceptible to that. You think, I'm pretty smart, and there's some area of the world or some sliver of human knowledge that I'm an expert in, and so therefore I'm probably an expert in many things, or there must be somebody who's an expert in everything. But one of the important things that we tend to forget, and this was actually illustrated in a nice little passage from Adam Smith, believe it or not. But the Adam Smith talks about the legislator who thinks, Smith calls him a man of system, and he says the man of system is the person who thinks that he can arrange all of the people in society with as much ease as the hand can arrange the pieces on a chessboard. So you just move things around and you get the exact arrangement you would like on a chessboard. And there is a certain kind of legislator who thinks, yeah, that's what I can do with all of human society. I put these people over here and those people over here, and these people do this and these people do that, and everything will work out beautifully according to my beautiful plan. And what Adam Smith says is, well, what that legislator forgets is that human beings, unlike the pieces on a chessboard, human beings all have what he calls principles of motion of their own, which means they're free creatures who make decisions, and sometimes they make unpredictable decisions.
Yeah.
And you can't plan for that. And so what inevitably happens is that no matter how beautiful your plan for society is, people won't follow it. They do different things, and there are always unintended consequences. That's why it's often called the law of unintended consequences, especially when you have, as we have in the United States, 330 million people who are all making different decisions in their own circumstances. We don't know all those individuals. We don't know all their circumstances. So the idea that we could somehow plan the entire thing, or that there's some great mind out there who knows all of those people and knows all of their circumstances and all of their preferences, et cetera, and can formulate a plan that would accommodate all of that, is a fallacy. But yet many people do tend to think that. We think that if we just make this one little change in economic policy or this one little change in regulatory policy, that everything else will stay the same, and yet it never does, because people respond in unpredictable ways to these things. And depending on your perspective, you mentioned the word, libertarian, but depending on your perspective, the fact that human beings make free choices that are often unpredictable can be something you would celebrate, and you say, oh, that's part of the greatness of humanity, or it can be something you lament. You say, well, I wish they would just follow my plan.
Well, I know in my own life I've celebrated both. Sometimes my freedom I've been happy about, sometimes like, why doesn't someone whip me into shape?
Well, and that actually is, an interesting analogy to think about. I mean, for people who are parents, if they have children,
yeah.
I don't know if you have any children. I have 4 children, and even in your own family, think about how hard it is to map out a plan for your kids. All parents have a sort of mental map of the future of their children's lives, what they want them to do and what kinds of people they want them to become. And I mean, even more day-to-day things like how they want them to dress and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to predict and almost impossible to get your kids to do exactly what you want, because they're unpredictable and they are their own people and they have their own ideas and their own personalities. And if you can't even craft a master plan for your own family, think about how difficult it would be for a family that's 330 million people, most of whom are not actually related, don't know each other, and many of whom don't even care about each other, and others, don't like each other.
It's a great metaphor.
The idea that we could develop a plan that would work for all of them is, I think it's just a kind of intellectual, an understandable maybe, but nevertheless an intellectual fantasy.
Well, it's an intellectual fantasy coming by, smoking Colorado grade marijuana maybe too much. I don't know. That's a great metaphor for the kids. I interviewed a lady named Tali Sharrett. She's a neuroscientist. She gave me one of the great nuggets of parenting many years ago, and it's been great. And in her book, they studied the neurology of a human being, like under the MRIs and the actives. I mean, they got all this technology. And what they found is about a human brain is that when information is presented that limits freedom and choice, people resist it. And yet when information is presented that expands choice, that type of persuasiveness is embraced. And I thought about that, and I experimented with my kids, and I really did. I said, honey, let's take everything we thought they should be, and let's wipe it away, and let's just let them choose things. And it has been absolutely nothing short of amazing. Now, they're only 15 and 13, so we're not done yet. It might turn into a total train wreck, and they wind up on a wanted poster or something. But the freedom is a big deal. Let's talk about the 7 deadly sins, biblically. I don't know what all of them are. I just know gluttony is probably my favorite. But one of them is envy. And I read a book by Stephanie Kelton, which I think is one of the most disturbing books I've ever read. I wish I could debate her from a philosophical standpoint. I think about, Dr. Otteson, I thought about the iPad, and I gave my kid an iPad when he was 4. And a lot of people said, that's too expensive of a gift to give a kid who's 4. But I thought, it's a window to the universe, right? The games they were playing, stacking the states and geography and math. And they'd if they wanted to know something, I was like, we went to London, and my son said, yeah, the stained glass in Big Ben is interesting because if one of them breaks, it takes 7 years for it to fade to the... I'm like, how do you know all this crap? And he says, well, I have the internet, Dad. I have the internet. And you take a guy like Steve Jobs, how hard is it to create 350 million of those and then not only create them, but deliver them to 350 million people around the world? I mean, how many Super Bowl arenas that fills? That's a hell of a thank you, Steve. Thank you. I look at Amazon. I think I get something from there about twice a week. And here this guy has figured out a logistic, start out with a bookstore, and he has become a logistical genius in getting products and services to me so quick. And I'm so thankful. And I'm so thankful for my iPad. And, even this podcast is coming because I have Steve Jobs' equipment here in my office. So here's the thing about Stephanie that made me crazy. She was upset about the number of swimming pools that Jeff Bezos has. And I thought to myself, why do we need a law that says there's a limited amount of swimming pools you can have? Look, I don't care about how many swimming pools Jeff has. He's done some cool stuff for me, and I wouldn't want, 7 swimming pools. I don't even want a Ferrari. I wouldn't fit. But I think each individual person has the stuff they want. And if you want to set a goal to have 9 Ferraris, that's not my goal, but I'm not going to say that can't be your goal. And so what is envy? Is that a problem that could stop? What? I mean, the inequality is well, these guys are rich. Look, I have food, I have clothing, I have shelter. I can get my kids an ice cream cone. I don't want people to be destitute. But do I need to have 7 swimming pools like Jeff Bezos does to be fair? What's your thought on envy?
Well, envy is one of the 7 deadly sins for a reason, I think. I mean, I think all of the standard list of the 7 deadly sins, pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth, they are identified and have been identified for thousands of years now for a reason. These are things that we are all routinely susceptible to, very easily susceptible to, and all of them can lead to various kinds of damage and destruction, both in our own lives and our relations to other people. So envy is one we don't talk about as much, I guess, but it is one of the 7 deadly sins for a reason. And in the connection to inequality and Jeff Bezos, I think what might, I'm speculating a bit here, but I think, one of the things that might go on is if you think about the great civilizations that human beings have created in the past, the Egyptian pharaohs with their pyramids, and the Roman Empire and the Song dynasty in China. If you think about those civilizations, and then look at, how did those people get all of that wealth, all that capital they needed to build the pyramids and to build the Colosseum in Rome and all of that? Well, how did they get it? They got it by taking it from other people.
Slavery, right? Yeah.
Conquest, slavery, theft, fraud, through all of these different species of profound injustice. And so I think what a lot of people might assume today is that that's really the only way to get wealthy. The only way you can get wealthy is by stealing it from people, exploiting them against their will, stealing from people, defrauding from people, conquering and enslaving, etc. And throughout most of human history, let's be honest, I think that is exactly how wealthy, the emperor and the king, how did they get their wealth? Well, that's exactly how they got it. And we might call all of those ways extraction. So many people have made themselves wealthy by extracting wealth from other people, so it benefits themselves, but at other people's expense. But there is a different way to become wealthy, and that's really something that's only become possible and widespread in the last, maybe 200 years, relatively recently in human history, and that is through what I would call cooperation, where I create or produce something that you value, you create or produce something that I value, and we exchange. And we do so voluntarily. So not by me stealing it from you, but through a voluntary exchange, voluntary trade. And when you have that, it's not me getting benefit at your expense. It's both of us benefiting at the same time. We both get better together. That I would call cooperation. So not extraction, but cooperation. And so I think when people today view the 7 pools or whatever it is and the 9 Ferraris that Bezos has, they might be thinking, well, I don't know exactly what he did wrong, but surely he must have done something wrong to become so wealthy. Yeah. And probably because they're still thinking in the historical terms of how did the emperor and the king in the past get wealthy through extraction. But I would note just one interesting fact for you. Not only is it I think the case that people can become wealthy through cooperation, where both parties are made better off through positive sum transactions, but a few years ago, William Nordhaus, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, actually tried to make an estimate over the last approximately 80 years in the United States. He looked at entrepreneurial innovators and tried to estimate how much of the total value created through entrepreneurial innovation was captured by the innovators themselves. In other words, if 100% is all of the value that they created, what percent of that was going to them? And looking at all of these different entrepreneurs and all these different innovations for about 80 years in the United States, he came up with the estimate of 2%. So 2% of the total value that they create in the world do the innovators themselves capture.
Interesting.
So if you think, what that means is that the rest of us enjoy 98%.
Yeah.
So, put that in the context of Jeff Bezos. So I don't know exactly what his net worth is estimated to be today. It's something very high, 150 billion, maybe it's 200 billion. I don't know what it is. Suppose it's $200 billion. Well, if Nordhaus's estimate of 2% is correct, then that means that Jeff Bezos's $200 billion of net worth represents only 2% of the total value he's created in the world, which, if you check my math here, but I think that would mean something like $50 trillion worth of value is what he's created in the world.
I can't do that in my head, but I'll trust you.
Yeah, well, it's some astronomical number.
It's ridiculous.
That gives you an idea that, $200 billion is a lot of money, but it pales in comparison
to what he's given.
The total value created for the rest of us, even though we don't see it because it's divided among hundreds of millions of people who are using his products and services, even just a little bit every week and sometimes multiple times a week.
Yeah, I think Steve Jobs is a better visual. He has, gigantic wealth. My son has an iPad and I have a computer and we have Apple TV. So you have that small luxury times, billions of people around the world is going to translate into a large luxury for the guy that gave it to the billions, right? And it's no way if you take the aggregate to level that ledger in the favor of the capitalist. However, I will say this, the attributes that make the best of what a human being is, really, if you want to look at the economics of socialism and the economics of capitalism, the sins are everywhere. For example, greed is a love of money and almost an insatiable desire for more for the sake of having more money. And when you step over the line of saying, well, I just want the money, I'm not making the world better, giving value to others, there's not a fair exchange. So greed is when we want money in an unfair exchange for the sake of insatiable money, wanting cash, an inequitable exchange, right? What is an inequitable exchange? It's wanting a lot for a little. It's wanting something for nothing. And what's interesting is a capitalist that is beneath the greatest attributes of human goodness will be greedy and want inequitable exchanges. But what's interesting is so will the socialist when you throw a little sloth in there too. There's some people that want to get something for nothing, and it's just which part of the pyramid do you want to be honest about? Do you want to be really honest about some of the, Bernie Madoff was not a capitalist. He was a dishonest guy with sloth and wanted something for nothing, right? Yeah. And so you look at a guy like Madoff in the billions, but you also look at a person at the bottom of the economic thing who says, look, the government should take care of me. I don't want to put out much. I don't want to take a risk. I don't want to, I'm entitled to these things, and I should just have this because I exist. No other animal on earth has the ability to protect themselves like we can. Lions aren't entitled to anything. Whales aren't entitled. Flowers aren't entitled. It's an interesting idea that we as the lords of this earth, because it's ours, we're entitled to not have pain. So I love the context of this framed in goodness and things that are good about human nature and things that are not so good about human nature, because when it comes down to it, whatever your politics are, it starts with loving each other, respecting each other, showing kindness to each other. Hate, anger, those types of things are not what bring out the best in us, and it tends to create that inequality. That's just my opinion. I don't mean to opine. Why should people read your book?
Thank you. I was lost in the thoughts you were just giving about that. I was going to say that I think one of the things that I would like for us to feel called to do is whatever station we occupy in life, whatever status we are, high or low status, wealthy or poor. I think one of the things we are called to do in life is to use our unique package of skills and abilities and talents to benefit not only ourselves but others at the same time, to think about ways that we can get better together, and that's what's honorable. And if we're trying to benefit ourselves without providing any value to others or without providing value to the world, then I think that's one of the true mistakes, and that's a recipe ultimately not only for robbing the world of the value we could have created, but also for unhappiness for ourselves. And to your last question about why to read my book, I think that's a pretty good reason, because what I tried to do in that book is lay out 7 of these easy and almost intuitive mistakes that we are inclined to make about understanding our place in the world and our connection with other people, and the kinds of political and economic institutions that can enable us to have flourishing lives of our own, but also to contribute to the flourishing of other people as well. And these are mistakes that are very common, and all of us are susceptible to them in one way or another. But the first step towards overcoming them, I think, is becoming aware of them, and getting rid of the 7 deadly economic sins, I think, is in some ways almost as, not quite as, but almost as important as getting rid of the 7 deadly sins in our characters.
I'll tell you, I love to promote the books because we have this idea of commencement after graduation from high school. We got to commence, and we don't finish, we start, right? We commence and we continue education. And if I'm going to be part of an electorate I just want to know as much as I can, and I don't care how, then vote your conscience, whatever you want to do. I'm not here to persuade people to do one thing or the other. I would advocate for education and the ability to update my beliefs based on new facts learned. I struggle with that. I think we all do. We have our ingrained stuff. We tend to go out and search the internet for things that confirm our biases, rather than truly look at both sides of the coin objectively and say, can I update my beliefs based on new information? Or is my philosophy, dogmatic and set in stone? Am I trapped, as Steve Jobs says, am I trapped by dogma? I hope we can find more forgiveness in the world. I mentioned earlier how nervous I get as a podcaster, and if I were to sympathize with someone who had a bad moment, who said something insensitive, and says, the guy blew it, he got emotional, said something insensitive, let's maybe forgive the guy. Oh my gosh, if you do that, now you failed to sympathize with those he offended, and you're heartless, and there's division. You choose one side or the other all the time. And the division, divide to conquer, unite to win. And as long as we're promoting division, I'm right, you're wrong, division, we're gonna get defeated. Only when we unite. And I can look at a brother who maybe disagrees with me a little bit, but I can still be an American with him, and we can have a civil discussion and still love each other if we disagree. Boy, we're far from that. And so maybe books like this help, and maybe time pondering like this helps in saying, look, let's just be good people. And maybe that's what really makes the invisible hand work or not work is, what's the level of goodness we're trying to be as people. So you've been delightful.
I think that's very well said. And I would only add, that we should we should remind ourselves often that all of us are imperfect. We all make mistakes. And our goal should not be to tear people down and tear each other down, but rather to build each other up in solidarity and fraternity with one another.
Yeah, if you want to learn how imperfect you are, do what I do, trade stocks and options, and you'll find out how many mistakes you can make in a week. Yeah. And go into business, write books, you'll find that vulnerable. The book is 7 Deadly Economic Sins, Obstacles to Prosperity and Happiness that every citizen should know. The website's jamesaudison.com. You can go to amazon.com and, feed your brain and think about these things. You don't need to agree with them, but you can be open and say, well, I'll update my beliefs if I find something that resonates with me. That's a skill I try. I know we can't all do it. I try to be able to update my beliefs based on, new facts, but it's a big challenge. Any final thoughts as we part? And finish?
I think what you said is very well said, and I would second it. And I hope that my book can offer a little bit of help in that inspiring vision that you just laid out.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. My guest has been Dr. James Audison, philosopher and also teacher in the business school, author. And we hope you enjoyed the conversation. It gave you food for thought, whether you agree with us or not. We hope it was food for thought. And we just wish you the best until next time. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.